Thank you so much. It's always an honor to have people's attention for half an hour, that they want to hear what you have to say. And it's particularly an honor for me as a civilian to speak with people who have been in the U.S. military and fought and worked for this amazing country. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to try, as a non-veteran, to talk a little bit about the challenge of coming back to this society. That's a difficult thing for a lot of people. A little bit more than 10 years ago, I was supposed to go on assignment to Libya with my friend, colleague, brother, Tim Hetherington. The last minute, I had to cancel. He went on his own, and he was wounded by a mortar round fired by Gaddafi's forces in the city of Misrata. And he bled out in the back of a rebel pickup truck racing for the hospital. He almost made it. I never fully understood when soldiers would say, soldiers that I knew, combat veterans that I knew would say, you know, it's my fault that that guy died, that my buddy was killed. I mean, like, you know, he was 300 meters away. How is that your fault? I never got it until I found myself feeling that way about Tim, who was 6,000 miles away, and it was still my fault. And I think had Tim died in a car accident, or had he and I not been in combat together, I would have felt differently. But if you've been in combat with someone, and they die, and you're not there, it's your fault. And I slid into the most incredible depression. I didn't even know that that's what was happening to me, but I was incapacitated. My marriage was falling apart. Basically, everything seemed out of reach. Everything I cared about seemed beyond my reach. It felt like I was trapped in like bulletproof plexiglass or something, like I was completely by myself, surrounded by people I knew and loved, and I couldn't reach them. It was a terrifying feeling. And eventually, I got a few other guys together, guys who had been in combat, 2 veterans and another journalist, a guy named Guillermo, a photographer who was holding Tim's hand as he died. He was in the back of the pickup truck with him. And Guillermo and I became friends, became brothers. And we decided to walk from Washington, D.C. along the railroad lines north to Philadelphia, and we were going to continue to New York, where I live. We chose the railroad lines because they're these weird swaths of no man's land, and you can kind of, I mean, it's illegal, of course, and you have to do a certain amount of, like, dodging the police, which was, honestly, it was a little bit of the appeal, if I'm going to be honest. But you can kind of do what you want. You know, we were sleeping under bridges and getting our water out of creeks and walking 5, 10, 15, 20 miles a day, carrying everything we needed. When we ran out of food, we'd go walk through a town and buy some food, go back out onto the railroad lines. We had my dog with us. And over the course of 400 miles, most nights, we were the only people in the world who knew where we were, what abandoned building we were in, or what field, or what ravine. We were the only people who knew where we were. And I realized later, there's many ways of defining freedom. And I'll get to that important word later. But having no one know where you are in the world, that's one form of freedom, right? And it actually became a kind of intoxicating one. And we really sort of reveled in this anonymity. At one point, we eventually, you know, we hit Philadelphia, and then we decided to turn west. We did this over the course of a year, multiple trips. We decided to turn west and head for Pittsburgh instead. We'd grown tired of the East Coast. Well, right before Philly, we walked through a town called Chester, Pennsylvania, a very tough town. For a while, it was the murder capital of America, a broken town, a wounded town, a war zone. And I have to say, the interesting thing about war zones, I'm comfortable in war zones because for the most part, people are very nice because everyone understands what it means to be up against it. And they help each other in a strange way, in a way that I think veterans will understand, it's actually quite a good place to be if nothing bad happens to you. And in a town like Chester, 4 guys show up walking through one end of town, carrying everything they need and a dog on a leash. We were seen as maybe needing help, and we got it from people. It was extraordinary. And on our way through town, there was this guy sitting on his front porch, and it couldn't have been a poorer neighborhood in a broken city, right? And he was there drinking a beer on his front porch. We walked up, and this is a question I would ask people. I said, "What's the best thing about this country, sir?" I was curious what people would say, right? And Chester being the kind of town it was, I was braced for something pretty cynical. And without even hesitating, he said, "Freedom. It's a free country. And a lot of the world isn't free, but we are, and that's what I like about this country." I was very moved by that answer because he was not a wealthy person. He was a very poor person and in a very dangerous place. And he understood this thing, freedom, its value. It's a word that's horribly misused for political purposes. I'm not interested in that part of the conversation. I'm interested in the part of freedom that has to do with human dignity. And that's the part that he was talking about. So we kept going, hooked a left at Philly. The thing about railroad lines is it goes through everything. It goes through ghettos, through farms, through woods, through affluent suburbs, factories, everything. And so we hooked a left at Philly, and all of a sudden, past Harrisburg, we just entered this beautiful, wild part of Pennsylvania, wild part of this country, the Juniata River Valley. Juniata means standing stone in the native languages of that area. And there had once been a huge standing stone inscribed with symbols and origin myths from the native people there. 15 feet high, it was an enormous thing, stuck into the ground. And when the Europeans showed up, the people that lived there somehow dug it out and transported it. And no one knows where it is, where they moved it, or how they moved it. It disappeared. But the river retains the name Juniata. So this was the east-west passage that the Native Americans moved along on trails, and then the settlers followed those trails and made roads, and then eventually the railroads came along and made railroads on those paths, and that's what we were following. We're following an ancient mobility corridor west through the Alleghenies, one of the few passages that goes west. And when it was incredibly beautiful and an odd place as well. There was an enormous amount of gunfire. I don't know why in Pennsylvania. I mean, it was like we were in a low-level insurgency, except and at one point, someone even sort of took some shots at us. I don't know why, and you can imagine had the predictable reaction. But we were okay. For the most part, we were treated extremely well. And I did my research. I did some research about the Juniata Valley, and this was the place. The Juniata was the place where the early settlers. They passed through Harrisburg and through this gap in the mountains, and then they're on the Juniata, and they were beyond the control of the colonial government. They were in what was called Indian territory, right? So they were in an enormous amount of danger, but they were completely free. They were free from any kind of government control. But that comes at a cost. And the cost is that they were in a lot of danger. And the only way to survive that danger, I mean, the native population did not want them there and did everything they could to kill them and scare them off. And the only way to survive in this place of incredible beauty and freedom was to band together. The settlers that ventured into this area basically had a pact. Like, when there are uprisings along the frontier, we will all gather together at the stockade. And we've all seen the movies, we know the myths, we know this part of American history, right? It's etched into our minds. We will all gather at the stockade and fight to the end. And if you are not willing to do that, you are not welcome in our community. You are not wanted. You have to make this group of brave, struggling people, the men, the women, the children, these are whole families, right? This isn't just young guys. These are whole families out there, very vulnerable population. And they're firing weapons that take 30 seconds to load another round into. Imagine a firefight with that problem. If you're not willing to die defending the group, you're not wanted. In other words, they traded obligation to one thing, the government, for obligation to each other. That was the only way to survive. And what I understood from this is that there really is no freedom without some kind of duty, because people do not survive by themselves. They do not survive alone. They survive in groups, and they survive in groups that they are willing to make sacrifices for. And whether that group is the government or 20 people that you've followed into Indian territory in 1740, it doesn't matter. You owe your fellows, your brothers and your sisters, you owe them, and they owe you, and that's why any of this works at all. I've been thinking a lot about this because, freedom is one of the few things that people will die for. They'll die to protect their families and their communities, and they'll die for freedom. And at the end of the day, I realized it's the same thing. They can't exist without each other. I think one of the tragedies of modern society, along with the innumerable blessings that I don't think I have to list, we all know what they are, but one of the tragedies of this amazing society is that we have sort of mechanized and automated so many of the survival tasks that for hundreds of thousands of years have confronted humans. We have automated that so successfully. We've made life so safe and so removed from sort of daily hardship and toil that it can feel like you actually don't owe anything, right? I mean, the threats to your life are not proximal. They're very, very distant. And it can feel as if you just exist in society and you don't owe it anything. And that is an enormous loss. I mean, psychologists will tell you that when you act selflessly, it does incredibly good things to your state of mind, to your mental health. The group needs it, of course, but you need it even more. When you act selflessly, you're actually helping yourself enormously. It makes life feel more meaningful, more profound. It makes you feel like you're necessary, and people want to feel necessary. It's the thing that makes us feel good and secure in the world. And our society has brilliantly taken care of so many tasks that we can imagine that we're actually not necessary. We're not needed. And it has allowed people to say, I don't know anything to all this. That's a tragedy. As I say in my book, only children owe nothing. But the rest of us owe something, owe a lot. And the amazing thing about veterans is that you all, in your service to the country, have experienced that. Not everyone has, but you all are lucky enough to have done that. It comes with some complicated baggage, particularly if you were in combat. But it's an incredible thing that you all have put yourself through and given to yourselves. Sophocles said, "Nothing vast enters the lives of mortals without a curse." You experienced something vast, and I don't care if you were a supply clerk or a Navy SEAL. The fact that you were part of this great enterprise, serving this great country, made you experience something vast. And in that you're blessed. You really are, because that's something that many, many people do not have the privilege to experience. But here's the curse. You come back from that experience to a society which is automated and where everything is outsourced, and it's very divided politically and economically and socially and in racially, in every imaginable way. And you come back from this great task overseas, and you come back, and you might experience these two sort of like very problematic reactions, that the best part of yourself was left overseas, that there's no way to have that amazing part of yourself that was needed overseas. There's nowhere to put it. There's no use for it here. It's not required. So you don't have access to it. That's a very painful thing. And the other is that, understandably, you might feel superior to people that didn't do that. Feeling superior has many advantages, and it can be quite seductive, but at the end of the day, it alienates people. And alienation is dangerous. And so you come back, and that is a very, very complicated transition. And it's no wonder that veterans take sometimes many years. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the trauma of combat. Just being part of an enterprise like that and coming back to this society that already has incredibly high levels of suicide and depression, that's what you're coming back to. You could almost say there's nothing to come back to compared to where you were. And that is very, very hard. It's hard on everybody. So I'm here to tell you now that your country still needs you. And they need you because you have experienced what unity, real unity, feels like. When I was out at Restrepo, there was all kinds of people out there, right? White, black, rich, poor, conservative, liberal, religious, atheists, everything. There was everything. In that platoon, there was everybody, right? Those differences meant absolutely nothing in that situation. And the ultimate reality, because they were getting shot at so much, the ultimate reality was there's us and there's them. And I think one of the things that's very painful for a lot of Americans, and I can't imagine what it's like for veterans, is to be in this country and you hear people calling other Americans them. And let's be honest, both sides do it, and shame on them. This country is no one thing, right? It's not Democratic, it's not Republican, it's not MAGA, it's not Antifa, it's not religious, it's not religious, it's not white, it's not black, it is nothing. It's something that the world has never seen before. It's America. And it contains, as Walt Whitman said, multitudes. It contains everything. That's what's amazing about this country. That's what makes it strong. Is that complicated? Of course it is, right? Families are complicated. I live in New York City, in the Lower East Side. I mean, the entire world is in my neighborhood, right? Every language, every way of dressing, everything. Is it complicated? It is, but it works. And we may be the only country in the world where it really does work at this scale. And you all know, because, I mean, the military is, I think, the most democratic institution in this country. And democratic in the sense that all people are equal. It's extraordinary. And that is what this country, right now, we're at a bit of a crisis point, I think. That what you all know is what this country needs. And I've given a lot of thought to how can we bridge this military-civilian divide? Like how can we create situations where the country can learn from you and you all can experience what it means to be a citizen at home? You know what it's like to be a citizen overseas, a citizen at home. And so what I came up with, it's based on, I mean, of course, I didn't invent this. All good ideas have already been thought of. I looked at Native American ceremonies for bringing back warriors from combat. And of course, those populations in North America had very strong traditions of warfare. Fighting was like a central ethos in many of those societies. And, the warfare back then was, you can imagine, up close and personal. And the psychological cost to the warriors must have been incalculable, right? And they come back to their people, to their tribe. And you have to keep in mind, our soldiers are fighting thousands of miles away. In that situation, they might be fighting 10 miles away. And if they're defeated, everyone dies or is enslaved, right? You are fighting for your families and your children. And they come back. So everyone's involved. Everyone has a stake in this, and they come back. And they ritualize the return. And the warriors have a chance to sing and dance and tell their exploits to the people that they did those things for, who are gathered all around them. And there are two advantages to this, two amazing things that come out of this. First of all, it's very cathartic. Speaking in public about emotional things affects people in ways that no amount of one-on-one talk therapy can, I think, with a psychologist, although that's also can be very, very important. But it allows the community to participate in what happens. This is our fight. You are our person. We are in there with you. I've been trying, sometimes these very simple concepts are very hard to define. Like try to define the word freedom. It's almost impossible. How do you define the word tribe, right? I wrote a book called Tribe, and I'm still struggling to define it. And it occurred to me maybe just a few weeks ago. Oh, tribe is this. It's this arrangement. What happens to you happens to me. That's how you know you're in the same tribe as someone else. If you're hungry, I'm hungry. If you're in danger, we're both in danger. That's tribe. Easier to do that with 10 people or 30 people than it is with 300 million. I get it, of course. But that is the challenge we have set up for ourselves. How can we think as a unity at that scale? Because if we can do it, we will continue to have the most amazing country in the world. We have to do it. Last year, I had a very strange, unexpected medical event happen to me. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my abdomen, in my pancreatic artery. Super rare. It was just a congenital abnormality, and no symptoms. These are deadly, right? No symptoms. I'm in good shape. I'm healthy. Had nothing to do with anything. And one day, the aneurysm, which is a ballooning of the artery, right? It ruptured, and I bled out. I started bleeding out in front of my family, my two little girls and my wife, bleeding out into my own abdomen. And if you get shot in the stomach, the doctors know where to look. If you have a ruptured aneurysm, they don't even know where to begin looking. And I was rushed to the hospital. It took 90 minutes to get to the hospital. My blood pressure was 60/40 when they got me there. I was dying fast. I felt myself go. And as I was crossing over that threshold, my dead father appeared. Now, I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. I'm not a mystic. There he was, welcoming me. And what I said to him was, we got nothing to talk about right now. And they saved me. They put 10 units in me, and 8 hours later, touch and go, but they managed to save me. And the next morning, I woke up in the ICU, and I knew something. My blood oxygen was so low, I wasn't thinking very clearly. I knew something bad was going on. I didn't know I was dying. I had no idea. Hence my surprise at seeing my father. But the next morning in the ICU, the nurse came in. I sort of regained consciousness mid-morning, and she said, Sebastian, glad to see you're doing better. You almost died yesterday. And I had no idea. What kind of news is that to get, right? And I said, are you kidding? I almost died? I was just in shock. And then she came back an hour later and said, how are you doing? And I was like, physically, I'm okay. I was throwing up blood. I actually wasn't doing that well physically, but I pretended I was. But I said, frankly, what you told me has really messed with my head. Like, it's terrifying. I almost died. Are you kidding? And she thought about it for a moment, and she said, try thinking about it like this. Instead of thinking about it as something scary, think about it as something sacred. Like, what did you learn out there? And I've been thinking about that ever since. I've thought about, what did I learn about life, about death, about myself? I was given this view. I was taken to the threshold of life and death and allowed to look over the edge, and then I was allowed to come back. What did I learn? So that is what I would say to you as veterans. You were taken to a very intense place, a place of life and death, and of love and comradeship, and of missing your families, and of just about everything else. You were taken there, and you came back. What did you learn about yourselves? What did you learn about life? And what did you learn about your country? We need to know, this country needs to know what you found out. On this anniversary, close to the anniversary of January 6th, a year ago, a time of really great peril in this country. On the anniversary, we need to know what you found out, because what you found out can help us, can save us. It is on you guys. I know you can do it, and the nation is waiting to hear. If you do organize or attend a Veterans Town Hall, one thing that I would say is that I hope there's enormous benefit for you. That's why I started it. But I'm quite sure that there's also an enormous benefit for the community members gathered around you, because there are very few opportunities for Americans to experience what it's like to stand in their community in support of one another. That's a profound experience, a sacred experience. And if you do a Veterans Town Hall, attend yourselves. You need to, you must, but also understand you are once again doing something very, very great for your country. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's a real honor to be here with you all. Thank you very much.